Hello and good morning. You're all tuning into 104.5 Apocalyptico, the only radio station delivering all your apocalyptic needs, and I'm your host, Ramy Nazim. For all our new listeners, last week we read and got into details on the Zoroastrian apocalypse called the Arda Viraf Nama. This apocalypse was popular amongst the Zoroastrians of antiquity, and we know this because it's been translated many times by Zoroastrians both from their homeland of Iran and India. Today I plan on opening the phone lines for all you listeners to call in and ask any questions, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Let's just recap on the main contents of the Arda Viraf Nama. We read a 16th century version of the text written in New Persian, which bears very close similarity to the earliest 10th century version, which was written in the ancient language known as Pahlavi. The Arda Viraf Nama kicks off with the Sasanian king Ardashir having taken power, and from his power he establishes peace. However, the Zoroastrian community has doubts about the religion, and so the king wants to dispel these doubts from his people and asks the Zoroastrian priests to figure out a solution. The priests gathered together and chose the most righteous of them, Viraf, to undergo a special ritual that would lead him into the spiritual realm. The king hopes this otherworldly journey will allow Viraf to ask questions, seek answers, and dispel the doubts his people have. To prepare for this journey, Viraf went to the fire temple, the religious institution of the Zoroastrians, where rituals are performed and where an eternal flame burns. Fire is one of the most, if not the most, sacred element in the religion. After performing some purification rituals and eating, Viraf drinks wine and is then put into a slumber lasting 7 days. Once asleep, Viraf enters the spiritual realm and meets Siraj. Siraj is a revered spiritual being of Zoroastrian theology, thought to embody observance, prayer, and ritual. Siraj would then be Viraf's spiritual guide. Led by Siraj, they ascend to the Shinvad Bridge. This is the bridge souls cross to enter heaven or fall off into hell. Good souls can cross this bridge with ease as it appears wide. However, as one's soul collects more sins, the bridge becomes more narrow and can become as thin as a razor, which the soul would not be able to cross and would fall into hell. In the Arda Viraf Nama, Siraj and his second guide, Urd Bihisht, who is the embodiment of fire, lead Viraf to explore all the levels of heaven, star level, moon level, and sun level. The higher the level equated to a higher level of bliss. Viraf describes the heavens as sublime and beautiful, and through his guides is able to interpret the conditions of the souls. The souls were found dancing with relatives, wearing crowns, luminous and glowing, wearing clothing of multiple colors, and the landscape was described as gardens beneath which rivers flow and birds flying above. It's really beautiful. What's interesting is that the souls described in heaven were never individually pointed out. Rather, the guides would say, these are the souls of kings, these are the souls of farmers, these are the souls of shepherds. So they were stereotyped groups. In the Arda Viraf Nama, we also get to explore the descriptions of Hamistagan, which is analogous to purgatory, for all of you that know. It is the place where the souls go if they have performed as much good on earth as they have performed bad. Their punishment, according to this apocalypse, is simply standing amidst temperature changes. Overall, the author didn't put much emphasis on describing heaven, and this section of the apocalypse honestly only took up about a quarter of the text. The real emphasis of the Arda Viraf Nama lied in describing the fate of souls who were sent to hell. Now, the descriptions of hell are not for the weak of stomach. They're very vivid and quite wretched. And unlike in heaven, where stereotyped groups were mentioned, the author actually pointed out individual souls and their punishments, all of which Viraf witnesses and is guided by Siraj and Urd Bihisht. Hell is described as a dark place full of snakes, scorpions, and torture. Viraf witnesses countless numbers of souls being tortured beyond retaliation law, souls crying of starvation. It's a disturbing scene. I mean, some punishments for the souls included eating feces and blood. Snakes and scorpions were eating corpses, tongues being ripped out. And out of these countless descriptions, there are some which you go over quickly. In Zoroastrianism, there are quite strict purity laws for menstruating women because blood is seen as impure and it pollutes the pureness of the earth. So, menstruating women were kept pretty much isolated. They avoided contact with things and people. This included eye contact. In an episode of the Arda Viraf Nama, Viraf witnesses a woman eating excrements and blood. Why? Because she did not observe her menstruation purity rules. In another episode, Viraf witnesses a soul being punished for not tying his kusti. Now, the kusti is an essential accessory of Zoroastrian apparel, and it really represents Zoroastrian identity. Before Viraf is sent back to Earth, his guides lead him to the highest heavens again to speak to Ormazd himself, and Ormazd is God. The big message left for Viraf is to tell his people not to turn from the religion. So this pretty much sums up the Arda Viraf Nama. I recommend anyone interested in apocalypses to read it. It's got poetic tones and it has very vivid descriptions. However, like I said, those weak of stomach should not read the section dealing with hell, which is pretty much 75% of the text. Anyways, I've got the phone lines on and I'm ready to answer any questions.
Hey, I was tuning into your show last week and you were explaining how Jewish apocalypses originally had the function of giving emotional comfort in moments of difficulty. Do you think that the Arda Viraf Nama also has this function? Why or why not?
That's a great question, and I was alluding to it earlier. Let's break this down. Was there a moment of difficulty at the time this apocalypse was written, or at the time it was popularized? And the answer is yes. And I believe that the Arda Viraf Nama was not used in efforts to provide emotional comfort during difficulty. Rather, I believe it was used to instill a bit of fear in their followers in efforts for the Zoroastrians to not leave the religion. The struggle I'm referring to is that the Zoroastrians were losing their identity. They had doubts in their beliefs and therefore they were leaving the religion. I mean, Islam was like a plague to the Zoroastrians. It became the state religion of their homeland and empire. Zoroastrians, by the end of the Sasanian period, were converting at high rates, either to avoid social exclusion, to avoid paying the state tax for not being Muslim, or even to finally lead an easier life void of strict purity rules. I mean, I bet women converted to Islam happily for the fact it meant they didn't need to follow harsh menstruation purity laws. The struggle was beyond persecution. It was the struggle to keep the Zoroastrian identity and religion alive. The Arda Viraf Nama may have provided some emotional comfort to its audience. I mean, it gave some glorious descriptions of heaven. There was happiness reflected by the souls of heaven. There was a gorgeous atmosphere. But overall, the content dealing with Viraf's heavenly journey took up only a fraction of the text. It was definitely not a major focus of the author. In hell, the individual souls were actually pointed out, whereas in heaven, like I said, it was only stereotyped groups of people. As with many apocalypses, the author never outright stated the struggle. Rather, it's stylistically embedded within the text. And in the Arda Viraf Nama, there's some key points I want to show that describe the struggle. So first off, the author describes the severe punishment to the souls who bathed in the bathhouses of the unbelievers. Now, these believers probably referred to the Muslims at the time, but because of the way he stylistically didn't mention it, this verse can be used at any point in history to basically tell Zoroastrians, limit your contact with non-Zoroastrians. Siraj strongly encourages Viraf to tell his people what? That no real joy lies in the earth, but only in the afterlife. Zoroastrians who may have converted, for instance, to avoid harsh purity laws, the author is basically saying, you may get temporary bliss, but that bliss is nothing. The consequences of leaving Zoroastrianism are severe, and the real joys lie after death. In a third point, Ormazd himself tells Viraf to tell his people not to leave the religion, right away signifying the apparent atmosphere of the time. Zoroastrians were leaving the religion. Emotional comfort is used to tell the audience there is light at the end of the tunnel, whereas in this case, the Arda Viraf Nama seems to have been written not for their followers to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but instead to at least remain in the tunnel, to stay Zoroastrian. Yes, it may be more difficult, but the consequences of leaving the religion are far more severe, and as Siraj said, there's no real joy on earth. Hope that answered your question. I have time for one more.
Why do you think throughout history many people have turned to religion as a source of emotional comfort in moments of difficulty?
Great question. Well, for me, this is all psychological, and I believe it begins with reinforcement. As children, we look up to our parents for guidance, and our parents usually have their own personal convictions, whether it be Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Muslim. From these religions, they have derived values and beliefs which they teach us children. So, for example, if you were a child of Christian parents and you woke up early, got all ready for church, woke up your parents and said, let's go to church, your parents would reward you for that behavior. By doing so, you feel good about yourself. And we as humans, at least in childhood, usually equate behaviors that make us feel good to those behaviors being the right thing to do. Therefore, if observing certain religious values, beliefs, and rituals are constantly being reinforced at a young age, you will begin to equate that entire religion to being the right thing. It becomes part of your own personal conviction. Performing those acts stimulates areas of your brain that release chemicals that make you feel good, such as dopamine. It makes you feel like it's the right thing to do. It makes you feel good about yourself. So once we're older and we no longer have parents to reward us, who do we look up to when the world comes crashing down? What in our lives has made us feel good, made us feel like we're doing the right thing? It's been religion, it's been God. So people turn to religion for emotional comfort because our brains are circuited in a way in which observing those religious practices makes us feel good, brings us hope, brings us solace. That's what I believe, at least. Anyways, that's all for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show. Next week, we're going to be discussing the Divine Comedy with guest speaker